Hey everyone, Nupkasu here. We are back with another video. So today we have a big update to give on you guys on this new upcoming video game launch from the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. So all these specifications and system requirements will cover on this based on the low, medium settings with the 1080p and 1440p, along with this high to medium settings, and the best, the ultra, which will be 1440p 60 fps and 4K resolutions for 30 fps as well. So without wasting any time, let's get to the video. So the first requirement from the minimum spec for the 1080p at the 30 fps is the Intel Core i5 8th gen, which kind of released on 2016 to 17 years of a window, and exactly the same time of the era which AMD Ryzen 5 2600 series is what's been launched. So it needs a 16 gigs of RAM, which have a NVIDIA GeForce 1060, which is 6 gigs of RAM, VRAM, which was totally based on the Steam survey. This 50 to 60% of people have till now 1060, which is the 6 gigs of graphics cards, and from the AMD, which is RX 580, which was released on 2017. So it's quite enough to run this game, which is a kind of looks like it needs a high gigantic amounts of system requirement, but it's still optimized enough to run from the 1060. So that's a great. So it needs 100 gigs of SSD. That's a huge game which needs at least less than Call of Duty, but still a huge amount of storage it's gonna take. The Windows will be the same, and the recommended 1080p comes with the medium settings. So 1080p medium will be at the 60 fps is Intel Core i5 13th Gen K. So 13600K. It was released on almost 17 to 18 all along. So Ryzen 5 7600X, which was also released 17 to 18, and the 24 gigs of VRAM it's needed. Although we don't have the dual slot or dual channels of the VRAM, either it will be 8 gigs of 2 stick or 16 gigs of 2 stick or 8 gigs of 4 stick. So this will be the configurations, because the RAM should be in a dual channel, not in a single channel. So 24 gigs is a minimum, but I think if you have 32 gigs of VRAM, that's totally nicest, and this is the norms these days, that every games need this kind of RAM requirement. So the graphics standpoint is the RTX 3060. So it was having 8 gigs of VRAM, which was released in 2021. So still, if you want to have the graphics, is still 4 years behind of current gen. So it's still gonna run this game at medium settings 1080p, while AMD side 6600 XT, which was released on 2021, which was being introduced as a gamer friendly card, which was not having an encoder to it, so you cannot have the editing software for that, just for gaming. So it was not kind of a popular graphics card. It was being ashamed for that. So I think if it's an 8 gigs of VRAM, you can still run on the 5700 and 5700 XT as well. So 100 gigs of storage, it's normal for every resolution. So if you are having in a 1440p medium settings, and the 60 fps, you will need to have Intel Core 3600K, which was released always the same on this year 2017 to 18, and Ryzen 5 7600X, and the RAM would be the same, 24 gigs of VRAM, and the graphics card standpoint, it will be 1360 Ti. So the graphics standpoint is at NVIDIA GeForce 3060 Ti, which is 8 gigs of VRAM, and which was released back 2020 when we get on the lockdown, and it was a huge price spike on this graphics card. So, and from the AMD released 6700 XT, which is 12 gigs of VRAM, and it was released on 2021. So that was the graphics card which was directly going to head on with the 3060 Ti. So if you are going to have a 1080p high settings, previously it was a 1080p medium settings. So if 1080p high settings and 30 fps base target, then it will be the simple Intel Core i5 12th gen and AMD Ryzen 5 5800X. So Ryzen 7 5th gen and Intel Core i5 12th gen. So Based on that, it will be 2016 to 17 or 15 released the CPUs, and 32 gigs of RAM it's needed because the highly demanded and gigantic gameplays standpoint and huge open world and RPGs and the graphics standpoint on all these developments and all goes on, you know, these kind of games which is coming up and a huge demanding on these hardware systems. So for the graphics standpoint, it still needs a RTX 2060 Super, is released on 2019, but still needs 8 gigs of VRAM. So if you have the Nvidias from the 2060, 3060 is already there, and even all the 2070 or 2080, so it can run 1080p high settings and 1440p medium settings as well. So AMD Radeon RX 5700 and also RX 5700 XT, so these graphics can pull off easily with the 1080p high settings, which has the 8 gigs of VRAM, which was released in 2018 to 19. So the storage will be the same, and if you have the target hit for the 1440p 60 fps, then it needs an Intel i7 core 13th gen 700K, while AMD Ryzen 7 7700X 3D, because it will be having a 3D cache for newly introduced by the AMD CPUs, which has 3D cache. But if you lock the 3D cache, then it will perform always 7800X or 70 lower than that. But 3D cache is a pretty big advantage among these all Ryzen CPUs. So 13 gigs of RAM it's needed, and NVIDIA GeForce it's needed 4070, which is quite a bit of demanding. Previously it was the 3070 or 3080 or 3090, but now it's RTX 4070 directly goes up, which is 12 gigs of VRAM which needed and released on 2023, which is right now in 2025. It was just released 2 years before. And AMD Radeon 7800 XT, which was released 16 gigs of VRAM and 2023, the same 2 years before. So 7800 XT has a quite a bit of VRAM, so it gives you more advantage other than NVIDIA because of the raw performance, while RTX 4070 can have the more AI frames and AI, all these upscalings and all that things are just boggling around this internet, which can give you a low latency. But for this AAA game single player experience, you can have the much less differences. So that's quite a bit of the both sides of the best. So for the best and ultra games, which comes under the 1440p and 4K 30 fps, while 1440p 60 fps, if you wanted to achieve that, it needs i7 13700K, while AMD Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which has a 3D cache as well, which was released on 2020 to 21, and 32 gigs of RAM, which is needed. NVIDIA GeForce 4080, which is a huge requirements from these games, which is almost, I can say, 16 gigs of VRAM, and which was released on 2022, which have a more teraflops, more CUDA cores, and all these renderings specifications. While from the AMD sides, it needs a Radeon RX 7900 XT, which is 24 gigs of VRAMs and released 2022 at the same year of release RTX 4080 to compete. So I can say this is the highly demanding specifications and the rig requirements according to the standpoint of the games. But I think the games can deliver these to these consumers and the gamers. It's phenomenal. If it doesn't have these requirements for the upscaling or any AI frame gen or any other things for these specifications, because in this case from the Kingdom Come sites as well, from the developers and from their teams, they haven't any sort of notes has been mentioned that it is based on upscaling or frame generation or FSR or XeXS. So they haven't mentioned, which is quite a bit of good, and you will get all the raw performance from the rasterizations and all these without ray tracing or full ray tracing on. So this is the raw performance which has the requirements from these specifications from this Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which will be getting released on February 4th 2025. So it's just 1 month to get released, and it's getting huge updates daily on. So that's it from my side. I'll bring back the new videos and updates. I'll meet you in the next. Till then, keep gaming. Nubkasub out here.
Yeah, boy.